a special day today and our conversation we're about to have. So you're here for, how many people are here for the movies this afternoon? How good did they look on the screen? Really good, right? Yeah. But before I bring them out, people want to know how many people have not seen the third film? Just clap. Okay. So we will be a little careful with spoilers, but not that careful. So my first guest is, his title and his credits usually read Visual Effects Supervisor. He should be, though, maybe better known as cinema's great giver of life. He gives them to a wide array of characters, including the multitude of creatures in Lord of the Rings, in Avatar, in the Hobbit series, and of course, the Planet of the Apes trilogy. He is the recipient of 5 Oscars for his work and continues to be cited as one of the medium's greatest innovators. He is currently, and has been since 2001, the director of Weta Digital. Please welcome Joe Letteri. He has had a distinguished early career in British television and independent feature films, including some work with Mike Leigh. But he came to wider public acclaim with his work on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as Gollum, and King Kong in the Peter Jackson remake, and as Caesar, of course, in the Planet of the Apes trilogy, all outstanding examples of performance capture acting. He's recently set up something called Imaginarium Studios, which we're looking forward to chatting about tonight, both as a kind of a home for performance capture acting, and more traditional studio as well. His first feature film as a director called Breathe, starring Andrew Garfield, just hit theaters. Please welcome Andy Serkis. Welcome, gentlemen, and congratulations on this incredible achievement, this trilogy of films. Just before we get started, obviously the sort of central thing we want to talk about is this idea of performance capture and acting. But I think it's worth saying that this is a remarkable achievement on a bunch of other levels too. You know, you have 7 hours of dramatic intensity. In some ways, for me, it's like I was just rewatching them over the last couple of days. It has as much in common with kind of the amazing episodic television we're seeing right now as it does, you know, with the sort of the Hollywood sort of movie experience. And it also, kind of manages to carry the social and political import that, isn't often demanded from kind of Hollywood blockbuster cinema, and you feel it interwoven in different ways in all 3 of the films. It's kind of incredibly impressive. And then I didn't think anyone could tell the Exodus story again in an interesting way, and it's kind of amazing how they actually made that happen. So I think it's just worth really remarking on just what an achievement this is from a story and conceptual level as well. But I think the thing that for many of us really is the signature achievement here is the performance work and the intimacy of the film. And you two are really the people most responsible for this. So I want to kind of go back to the beginning, before the trilogy began, and kind of ask about, like, did you have any trepidation in approaching this project? There had been a much beloved 1960s and 1970s Planet of the Apes series. There had been a less beloved Tim Burton remake of the initial Planet of the Apes. There were a lot of expectations on this, and especially coming off the work that you had done with Peter on Lord of the Rings. So what were kind of the biggest, did you see as the biggest challenges and maybe the biggest opportunities with this?
Well, what happens, we had just come off of Avatar, which is also a Fox film, and John Kilkenny, who's the president of visual effects there, sent me the script for Rise. At the time, it was actually called Caesar, Rise of the Apes. So the story was definitely about Caesar. And look, I was a fan of the original, and I loved the twists and the turns, and as you said, the social commentary that was there. And the idea that you were telling this origin story from the point of view of modern day apes, evolving into what we know of as the Planet of the Apes. I loved the story, and I thought we really have to do this. And really my only trepidation is that Andy wouldn't be interested. Because it seemed like it would be you wouldn't want to make that film without Andy.
And so, Andy, when you saw it, did you have any concerns, or were you like in right away?
I mean, I'd not long come off the back of working with Joe on King Kong, and well, we actually made a few other things between, but when I received the script, I think it was one of the most powerful scripts I read as an actor. I mean, it was this incredible journey of a character who is an orphan who then grows up and believes himself to be human, and then discovers he's an ape, and then he becomes a revolutionary leader. And you know, this trajectory over the arc of this first film was just phenomenal. And Joe sent it to me, and I literally couldn't put it down. And I said, oh, absolutely, I love it, you know. And then people started to say to me, Andy, why are you doing another monkey movie? Why are you playing another ape? And I'm like, it's just like saying, Andy, why are you playing another human? You know, it's like this character was an extraordinary piece of writing, and touched, you know, and said so much about the human condition, and a lot about empathy, and about the way that, I mean, it was conceived, the character was conceived to allow us to see the world in a different way, and so the sense of Caesar as an outsider was what really appealed to me, and so that was the way that I came into the movie, to play him, as to find the common ground between humanity and the world of apes.
Did they have a sense of was there kind of already an outline? So it sounds like there weren't finished scripts, but there was already an outline of what Dawn and War would look like at that stage, or did that come later?
No, there's absolutely no. I mean, there was literally, this was a one-off as far as we all knew.
Yeah, absolutely. You're always just hoping that the first one's going to work before you can think about what.
Don't jinx it. That's amazing, because they actually were very elegantly woven together. That's an incredible achievement. So, Joe,
sorry, I was going to say, I think that's also a testament to the writing. As Andy said, it was a very powerful story. You got Caesar launched off on an arc that could go any number of ways. And of course, we all have in our minds what we think the Planet of the Apes is going to come to. So these movies give you a chance then to really explore the journey in a number of ways. Now, I think that's, to me, was most satisfying about going through war. It feels like there's a phase. We finished a nice arc of, you know, what Caesar has done for kind of launching all the, you know, the history, the mythology, where the apes are going to go with it. But to me, the most important part of it is the apes are the ones who carry humanity through. You know, everyone says, well, how can you make a movie where you're rooting for the humans to die? Well, you're not. The humans are dying anyway because of what happened. But it's Caesar and the apes that carry the spark of humanity forward. And to me, that's the most interesting part of it.
Yeah, that change is incredible. I want to ask you something I saw a little more on the technical side that I saw in an interview, that as you were approaching this film, I guess there had been a technological innovation that you were able to do capture live. And I guess there have been some instances before, but not maybe in this more sustained way than you had for Rise. Is that correct?
We do a system of motion capture called optical motion capture, which means you generally have the performer will wear a suit with dots on it, with markers. And the way this started is when we were doing Gollum, when Andy had done Gollum back on Lord of the Rings. He performed everything in the set with the actors, but we had to go back and try to recreate that performance on a performance capture stage. Ask Andy, look at what he did, try to recraft the performance. You know, Peter would be in there working with us to redirect it. And we did that for several films, and when it came to Rise, I wanted to find a way to not do that. So we developed some technology that allowed our motion capture system to integrate nicely with the live action system, because when you look at performance capture, what you really mean is you're setting up dozens of cameras all around the space trying to record everything the actor does. So that requires specialized cameras and specialized lights, which can interfere with the camera and the lights that you're trying to use to make the movie with, and vice versa. So that was really the big innovation, was for us to figure out how to get this integrated on set, so that what Andy is doing with the other actors and the director in the moment is what gets into the film. We really just wanted to break down that barrier.
I mean, as an actor, that must be so much more preferable. You're sort of in the moment so much more.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, as Joe said, I mean, we were always in the moment as far back as Lord of the Rings, because you were acting opposite your fellow actors. It wasn't like they had to imagine the character there. You know, that was the whole point. That was the big transition, the big understanding that Peter had was up to that point. Kind of, it was visual effects were imagined by other actors, and with a tennis ball and a stick. And Peter said, look, I don't want the actors playing Frodo and Sam to imagine what Gollum is doing, because he drives a lot of the scenes and is the catalyst for a lot of the action in the scenes. So that was the big turning point. And so to have me on set to play Gollum was the beginning of this journey. But as Joe says, the repeating of that was there was a potential to lose moments that were created in the moment, and the new technology, which was having facial capture, performance capture as it's become now known, rather than just motion capture, is the capturing of the entire performance in the moment, once only, with your fellow actors on set, without having to repeat it again. And that means that the level of integrated, the chemistry between you, the moment that is achieved, that's been directed by the director, and that you found as actors, is very, very intact, and has a truth and an emotional power that we didn't have up to that point.
Actually, I wonder though, was there, in the older days, was there an opportunity to, quote unquote, fix it in the mix? So when you actually were acting again from motion capture, could you correct things in your performance that you didn't like the first time?
Well, you can still do that. I mean, that's the great thing about it. I mean, you can still refine and hone and continue to work on the performance even after principal photography is over. And that is one of the great things about it. I mean, it's and we did that on all of them, well, particularly on this last movie, actually. But there is, famously at the end of Dawn, the scene, some of you have just watched Dawn, haven't you? Yeah, the very final shot where we push into Caesar's eyes is a completely different ending that was literally reimagined 3 weeks before the film was released. And when Matt Reeves told me about what he wanted to do, he was in LA. He directed me via Skype. I was in London at the Imaginarium Studios in my motion capture gear and head-mounted camera, and we literally created that shot. With 3 weeks to go, which was then sent over to, so he was in LA, directed me in London, then the information was sent from London to New Zealand, and 3 weeks later it's in the final shot of the movie.
That final shot was supposed to be on the Golden Gate Bridge, seeing the human armada show up, and Matt felt like two things. One, that was locking you too much into the story of the third one, so he had no idea really where he wanted to go with it, but also just you needed that feeling of the other apes now understanding that Caesar is the one that's going to carry them forward, and that moment solidifies it.
Yeah, it's one of the most powerful moments in this whole series. It's great. So we have this, I think this might be an interesting time to show this clip that we have that actually talks about the performance capture opportunity. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, should we just run it? Yeah, so let's roll the clip. It'll take us about 10-15 seconds to get set up, so we'll sit here awkwardly. There we go. interactions in all of the films, but especially that scene with Woody Harrelson. It's just incredible, and it's actually kind of leads me to my next group of questions I wanted to ask, which is, you feel as though there is, and maybe this is just me seeing it, maybe it's something that's on purpose, but there's a different, I feel like as you're going through the films and as the technology seems like it's also kind of increasing its ability to deliver different kinds of intensity. It's almost like in the first ones, the interaction between human and ape is sort of at the core of things. By the time you're getting here, even though that wonderful scene with Woody, there's so much depth of feeling in the interaction between the various apes, you know, and you sort of feel as though, and I just wondered whether that was driven more by story or by technology or by both.
Well, it's story, first of all. I mean, it all comes from story, it all comes from character, it comes from brilliant writing, the brilliant use of the characters and the metaphor to actually... I mean, Matt is an incredibly emotional director and will always look for the emotional heart of these stories, because you will get nowhere if you were just making a war movie, for instance, if you're just concentrating on the external war. What it is, the war for the Planet of the Apes in this last movie is the war for Caesar's soul, without giving it away for people who haven't seen it, because I know that people haven't seen it, so. There is an event that happens early on in the story which catapults Caesar, who has been an empathetic, you know, who has learned to be an empathetic being by virtue of the fact that he is both human and ape, and this terrible conflict within him. And then in the beginning of this third movie, an event happens that just catapults him into this journey of revenge and hatred. And so it is a very emotionally potent anatomy, kind of analysis and sort of anatomizing of empathy, this last movie. And so that it is, I think it contains some of the greatest, and not just from Caesar, but there's hugely emotional arcs for a lot of the ape characters too. But it all comes from story, and then of course, the amazing thing is the relationship between the actors, and then what Joe and the team at Weta are able to do, and the experience now of having worked on these movies for so long, is just a greater depth of understanding of how to elicit those performances and translate them and interpolate them, and then to transform them onto the physiognomies of the apes. And I mean, I'm telling Joe's side of the story, really, but all that expertise and artistry and, you know, engineering has improved hugely over the last 6 or 7 years that we've been making these movies.
Yeah, how would you actually describe that, Joe?
Well, everyone points to the technology, but for me the technology is really the mechanics that you build your technique on. It's really what you have to do to get to the level where you can concentrate on the artistry. And we're very fortunate we've had 3 films to do this. Like in the first film, we were just trying to figure out what does an ape look like. And that includes us working with the actors. You know, how does an ape move so it doesn't look like a man in a suit? Because motion capture will really faithfully reproduce an actor's motion. And that just the learning how to move like an ape, like that had to be so ingrained with what the actors did. And we had to be able to translate that to the ape performance. So these two things kind of, you know, work together. And as the films went on, and that was no longer an issue, you know, did we get the shape of Caesar's muzzle correct so he could do dialogue? Do we believe his eyes? You know, are we getting enough of Andy's expression and still, do they look chimp-like enough, but we can still understand what the emotion is? By the third film, we no longer had those questions, so we were really just focusing on the intensity and the depth of the performance. Because, you know, you'll notice that Matt tells a lot of this third film in close-ups. We haven't seen it yet, but there's a lot of very long, lingering shots. I mean, he really, and you know this just working with the actors, he really gives everyone room to breathe and to find, you know, the heart of each scene.
That's really interesting. I would think on a movie that's like has so much effects work going with it that the on-set experience would be a very structured and formal one, but it sounds like it wasn't.
Right. That shows the confidence and the brilliance of a director like Matt, who is all about the drama and the emotion, and that is exactly the point. I mean, this could, in the wrong hands, be a sort of visual effects fest, kind of with no content, no intelligence, no search for the drama and for performance, and it was as intimate as any low-budget independent movie. you know, in terms of, Matt would turn up and he wouldn't put the camera anywhere. I mean, it's quite rare, this is incredibly rare with a film of this scale. He would not put the camera anywhere until we'd rehearsed, until we'd worked through the scenes, until we'd really examined and broken them down and worked out what we wanted to say with the scenes. And so also the camera would then go down and literally be put in the right place to tell the story. And that is crucial, and that takes, as I say, a lot of confidence when there's a huge crew standing by ready to, you know, to get it in the can, because there's a lot to get in a day. But that is down to Matt's brilliance and his ability to trust and do what he loves doing, which is to elicit performances from actors.
Were there specific breakthrough moments? I mean, for me watching it, you know, there's obviously big emotional peaks in Rise, but in Dawn, there's that scene towards the end where, you know, kind of Blue Eyes comes back when Caesar's hurt, and there's a depth of emotion, you know, in that interaction, which to me really lifts the whole trilogy to a very different place. So for me, it was like, oh, that's what they're doing, you know, and it's this kind of moment of revelation. What was it for you guys?
Well, I mean, that's right. I mean, but also, of course, Caesar as a character is evolving throughout the course of these three movies. Not only is he aging, not only is he going from chimpanzee to a leader, to a founder of a society, to a leader in war, and you know, he's become a father figure. But he's also emotionally evolving, physically changing, becoming more human-like, intellectually changing, and linguistically changing. There's so many things going on. And all you know, so at that moment, you know, it was just like, okay, how do we now start to, in the second film, bring language into this? We used to do ape camps before starting to shoot, so that all the new actors coming in would learn what the hierarchy within the group was. We do these long extended improvisations which lasted for hours, with, you know, and so some apes would be just conversing using ape vocalizations, some using a combination of sign language, because some of them would have been taught sign language. Caesar would have taught some of them sign language. Caesar, of course, was probably the most evolved in terms of speech, but even he was finding language in a very proto way in the second film, and he goes on to evolve, and actually during the course of the second film, you know, the language at the end that Caesar is using is less staccato and, you know, just driven by a single kind of expressions. It's much more constructed and reflective, and that's seen as an example.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually one of the joys of the film is actually tracking each of the major characters in terms of how their speech growth actually occurs. And so when you have that, it's coming, so it's not really a spoiler alert, but as Maurice, you know, many people's favorite character, you know, starts to grow in his own linguistic abilities, there's a kind of your heart pounds for him like a parent. It's great. What kind of, I mean, for those, the changes of the language, I mean, I assume that how the mouths move is actually one of your greatest challenges here, and has been since you've begun down this road, this process.
It is, especially because chimp muzzles are much broader and much further forward than humans are. So, you know, the similarities give you a lot to go with, but the differences really do provide, you know, quite a challenge. And on the first film, you know, we knew Caesar would have a few lines, and we took advantage of the fact that he was born with this drug in him to kind of humanize him a little bit, especially around the eyes and actually in the muzzle. We pulled his muzzle back a little bit. In the second film, we knew some of the other apes were going to have to articulate more like Cobus, so we actually did something similar, pulled the muzzle in a little bit to give us some room, you know, to articulate. And we hid that in the aging process, in the 15-year difference. But we were also very careful about constructing how speech would evolve. Like if you notice, it only comes out when it's necessary. You know, in the first film, it's when Caesar hits that moment where he says no. That's the first time he says it. And in the second film, you go for like, what, 15 minutes, and it's all apes being very tribal, sign language. They have no need for speech. It's not until the humans show up that you have the necessity for speech. And so Caesar needs to start communicating with the humans. Cobus starts to get, you know, racked by what this means, and he starts to speak. You know, there's an urgency behind the speech. So we were all very careful and, you know, all talk through when and how this would come out. You know, Andy, Matt Reeves, myself, it was all something that we just had to kind of plan for so that it didn't come too early. So of course, then by the time we got to the third film, which was entirely told from the apes' point of view, you do have more speech. You know, everything is farther along, and I think, again, given the fact that there were 3 films to develop it in, it's much more acceptable when you see it happen. It's now part of the natural growth.
Right, so that's interesting. So you could argue it's going to be more acceptable after people have had this time to digest these changes in how the apes behave and how their mouths change. That's very interesting. So Andy, I want to talk to you about what it means to be the sort of preeminent performance capture actor working on the planet today. And in particular, there's this quote, which I hope is up on your wall, which A.O. Scott of the New York Times talks about Caesar as a role, quote, that continues to redefine screen acting in the digital age. His facial expressions and body language are so evocatively and precisely rendered that it's impossible to say where his art ends and the exquisite artifice of what the special effects company begins. To me, this quote must be both incredibly pleasing, but also a little annoying, because it continues to ask the question of where performance begins and ends in these things, in this effort. And I guess I'd love to hear from you where you think it begins and ends.
It's a question which has sort of been around now for 17 years, and it's the most incredibly simple in some sense, but difficult to explain in an easy way. I mean, from a purely acting point of view, and I can only speak from a purely acting point of view, the process of acting is rehearsal, is research, is building the psychology, the emotional centre of the character, of physicality, backstory, working then, improvising, developing and evolving, eventually getting on set and shooting a scene with a fellow actor, directed by a director, the performance of which is then put into the cut, and then cut in exactly the same way as any live action character that I've ever played on screen or on stage or on television. So the point being, the process of becoming a character, whether I'm playing Ian Jury, who's a punk rocker, or whether I'm playing Caesar, or whether I'm playing Albert Einstein, or whether I'm playing King Kong, the process of becoming a character is exactly the same. Physicality has always been a big tool for me as an actor, even going back as far as my theatre days, a way of embodying a character and bringing that character to life. Where does the character carry his pain? Why does Gollum sound like he does? Because he's guilty, and the guilt is trapped in his throat. All of these decisions that you make as an actor are what define what the character is. Now, people say to me, do you think there should be, let's look at it another way. People say, because it comes down to, this is all about awards sort of chat at the end of the day, and how to divvy it up, basically, how to divide up the,
Well, there was such a controversy with Rise, right? Because I think the studio was like, this is a great performance. Right. People should be recognized.
So this is here, and Joe, Joe will have a slightly different angle, or maybe the same, I don't know. But this is the way I see it. If you were to say there should be, and people have said there should be some kind of special category for, like a joint category for creating the role, I can only say from the acting point of view that if you look at what Gary Oldman is doing now, playing Winston Churchill in The Darkest Hour, he is working with a team of makeup artists that he will work with for 3 or 4 hours every day who apply that makeup art. He goes on set, shoots the scene, and then it's in the can. What we do as actors is we do exactly the same work, except after the fact, and this is not to be demeaning in any way, but there's a sense of the manifestation of the character being a form of virtual makeup. Because as you've seen, the intention, the intensity, the emotion, the in-the-moment decisions that you make as an actor is what is captured. So, and whether you do that, whether you put makeup on before or afterwards, is, to my mind, irrelevant. So whether you're playing, if you look at Charles Lawton playing the Hunchback of Notre Dame, or John Hurt playing the Elephant Man, or Gary Oldman playing Winston Churchill, or a role like Caesar, or I don't think there should be any discrimination against, because it's a different team of artists that are creating the final manifestation of the character after the fact. I do not believe there should be any discrimination between acting
funny. I mean, Joe, I want to get your take on this, absolutely. But I'm a big fan, and a lot of my background was in Asian cinema, and many of my favorite performances, the actual actor has to create the role, is in key scenes. There are doubles, there are other kinds of shots, there are other sorts of people who are meant to mimic that performance to actually carry it into stunt sequences, into action, into reshoots and things like that. And yet, that performance of, say, Michelle Yeoh in Crouching Tiger is her performance, and there's no doubt about that, whether there's effects and stuff like that. So I actually think it's entirely correct, and it sounds like the Academy just needs to catch up. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, and this goes back to Gollum. When we started doing Gollum, the idea was to do keyframe animation on Gollum. And we started down that path, but it's a very painstaking process because you are essentially reauthoring the performance. And we had the performance that we wanted. We all knew that was the performance we wanted to see on screen. So the idea is, how do you recreate this in a new character? Now, where we have to go one step beyond, though, where it's not makeup, is that we're doing things that you can't do with makeup. Because if you could do it with makeup, you would stop right there. But you can't do that with a chimp. So it's an active interpretation as opposed to makeup, which tends to be passive. We have to understand how to make Andy's expression, for example, read like Caesar. Like, I'll give you an example. Chimps don't have eyebrows. Eyebrows are very important for facial expression. So how do you get that look? Well, we decided we gave Caesar these little extra fat pads around where the eyebrows would be. So now you have to kind of make sure those are prominent, and we throw a little bit of light in to shade them so it looks like you're reading eyebrows. And these are like, you make these decisions constantly on every shot. There is no automatic process, performance in, monkey out. It doesn't work that way. So we spend a lot of time on this to make sure we're interpreting it and honoring that performance, because look, it all comes down to choices, like Andy said, and the fact that we had Andy, we've had Karen Conable, who really studied orangutans and gave a great performance as Maurice, or Steve Zahn as Bad Ape. I mean, these are great performances, so that's what we're trying to get on the screen.
So one question a friend of mine asked me to ask, there are a lot of apes, and there's a kind of a hierarchy. I mean, Caesar's on screen in close-ups, especially in the film we're about to see, a lot. And then as you sort of go down the hierarchy of the apes, you see less and less of them. Is Caesar getting a different treatment than the other characters on screen? And if so, what's the kind of gradation of that?
Not a different treatment, it's just that the more time you spend with a character, the more you understand the different permutations. I mean, look, we've been studying Andy's face for like 17 years. We scanned it a million different ways. It's like, can pretty much figure out what he's doing probably before he can right now. So and when you're working with other characters, you don't spend that time. You focus on what you need to get on the shot, and then you move on. And the more you work with a character, the more you understand it as sort of a body of work for that character. That's really the only difference, is the time we spend with them, and that tends to be proportional to how much you see of them on screen.
I also want to ask...
But every single ape in these movies is played by an actor. I mean, that is what needs to be understood also, is that all of the hundreds of apes that you see in the background, in Dawn of the War sequence, the battle sequences, when you see War, I mean, every single one is an actor in a motion capture suit, who's playing a role, which is a phenomenal thing. I don't think people tend to realise that, that it is sort of some digital tiling or something like that. I mean, for the most part, I would say pretty much all of them.
Yeah, and we follow the same paradigm as you mentioned earlier. There will be stunt performances, so sometimes it's not the actor, it may be a stunt performer, performing that chimp. Sometimes if they're doing something that's impossible for a stunt performer, we'll take over and do a bit of animation, like to really, slam the body into the ground, or, do things like that. But we do that on live action characters these days. We just don't want anybody.
Right. Pretty more dust, as they say.
No, I mean on the body, not the dusty.
Okay, wow. Of course.
Yeah.
I want to just go away from performance capture for 1 second. I think I read about that Matt, actually, as the films progressed, demanded more and more of you from locations, in terms of both from a capture perspective, so you're in kind of more and more exotic locations, as you'll see soon, but also a bigger challenge for you at Weta. And I think particularly, I recall you talking about snow and fur, and what a pain in the butt that is.
Well, okay, there's two aspects to it. So when you're capturing performances like this, as you can imagine, the gear has to be pretty accurate. Like, you don't want this stuff jittering or being approximate. And so, you know, as I mentioned before, we evolved by doing this in what was essentially a science experiment kind of setup into taking it onto a controlled set. Yeah, and then even in Rise, taking it outdoors to like a parking lot and a park, and, you know, things where it wasn't too hard to work with. On Dawn, Matt wanted to show, you know, 15 years in the future, you now have this evolving, almost Stone Age society, so we went out to the woods in Vancouver and shot. Very remote, so we just had to learn how to adapt the gear, make it more rugged, you know, do wireless, like a lot of things to just actually get the whole process going. On this third one, he wanted to really show the exodus, so that we're up in the mountains, in the snow, in the rain. And like, you know, you walk out there and it would be like freezing cold night, pouring rain, and Matt would come out and say, not enough, bring out the rain bars. You know, it was just really, he really wanted it to look like this was a real hardship for them. So,
and it was.
So, but, you know, to me, that's the evolution we've been pushing for. I mean, in my mind, it's like the old days of film when you first started doing sound and everything had to be blinked and you were locked with shooting on a stage. And, you know, as cameras got quieter, you can start to take it out on location. And then at some point, you weren't constrained to being in the studio anymore. And that's what we were shooting for. Anywhere that the story needed to take us, we want to be able to go. We've made ourselves just another part of the filmmaking crew. So if the story has to go, you know, out in these remote locations, that's fine. We want to be there. We don't want that to get in the way of what the actors and the director are doing.
But there's no moment where you were like, come on, Matt, this is so hard.
Yes, there were. I mean, you know, famously, The Revenant, you know, they all froze to death making that film. Well, we had the same crew, and by the way, they could wrap themselves up in furs, and, you know, we had skin-tight lycra suits. I'm sorry. You don't want to be out at minus 15 on a night shoot in a lycra suit. It's
It's hilarious. I'm going to go to the audience in a second, but Andy, I had just a couple more things for you. You alluded to it earlier, and I think one of the incredible things of watching the three films together is this extraordinary arc that you get as an actor here, going from the very beginning of life until very, very late in life. I mean, this is something actors never get to do. They usually don't get to be born. So, was there something special that you did to actually, sort of, as you were thinking and contemplating? Although you did say that with the first script, you didn't know there was going to be the rest, but there was some inkling that you were going to have a longer arc.
No, sure. I mean, it has been the most. And this is what the incredible thing is about this technology and what it allows you to do. And this is a prime example. You know, like you say, I can't think of any other movie where an actor has had the opportunity to play a character all the way from infancy through to mature adulthood. And it's not only that, but to go through this whole evolutionary change, a physical change, not only aging, but becoming physically something else. So going from pure chimpanzee to almost human-like. And that is the gift of what this can do. This technology, and it really, for me, the epiphany moment was coming out of the back end of Lord of the Rings. And I thought wow, what an extraordinary journey. I'm going back into my life now as a more conventional actor. What a fantastic time. And Peter asked me if I wanted to play King Kong. And I was like, what? And suddenly I realized there was this huge epiphany that 1 minute I'd been playing this 3.5-foot ring junkie, and now I'm going to be playing a 25-foot gorilla, and this is the end of typecasting, as you know. This means that any actor can play anything. It doesn't matter how tall you are, how short you are, whether you're a man or a woman, what colour your skin is, how old you are. This is the most egalitarian, mind-blowing, philosophically kind of cracking open a whole new way of acting for actors in in the 21st century. And that is why I've been so kind of passionate about it and continue to want to push it further and further and to try it, you know, in different things. And this, so to go back to your point, yes, to be able to play a character across that breadth of journey and arc has been singly one of the most extraordinary, things I've been able to do as an actor in my life.
And it sounds like and is that, so my understanding is the Imaginarium is kind of a zone for actors to sort of think about these things and play and understand what the possibilities are. So it sounds like it came out of this experience, but I'd love to hear more about what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, the Imaginarium it's a boutique, it's a very small version of something. You know, it's nothing like Weta, which is a huge organisation. But what we're trying to experiment with is how you can put performance capture, make it not just the affair of big blockbuster movies, but how we can use it in television, how we can use it in video game, in virtual reality, in augmented reality. We've been experimenting with it on the live stage. So, for instance, we work with the Royal Shakespeare Company and had an actor in a motion capture suit in real time projected his avatar images. It was The Tempest this year that we did. He was then projected onto different surfaces and clouds and areas where he was shape-shifting into all these different other avatars.
Perfect. Was he Prospero?
He was Ariel.
He was Ariel.
Ariel.
Of course. That's amazing.
So for me, and we've also worked with the likes of Bjork and Coldplay, and for instance, Bjork wanted to do an appearance at an art installation in London, but she couldn't leave Iceland, so we sent a couple of our guys over to Iceland, put her in a performance capture suit. We then streamed her bones, if you like, over the internet to our guys in London, who then projected her as an avatar character into this art installation in London. So that for me, it's about how we can continue to and all these new platforms that are opening up, virtual reality we were talking about, mixed reality where you can have avatars and theatre at the same time. I mean, it seems to me that there's a lot of storytelling potential, in the coming years, and different platforms with which to use this amazing technology.
Now, you've just directed this wonderful film, Breathe, which you got to see about a month ago. Congratulations. Not an effects movie. But did any of this work that you're doing kind of cross-inform your approach as a first-time feature director for that?
Actually, what was great about that was it's everything. What's hard about these movies is that you don't finally get to see the character until a year after post-production. It was amazing to be able to direct actors, and at the end of the day, what you had in the can was actually what you'd shot and what was going to be in the movie. And that was, we had 7 weeks to shoot it, and it was that was a different thrill all in itself.
Fantastic. So we have time for a couple of questions, I think. So if folks have stuff, we have mics trailing around, and whoever has the mic, just let me know where we're supposed to look out into the sea of light. You got one there?
Yeah.
Great.
I have a question in the center.
Are we not on?
It's on. It's on.
Why don't you yell it out and I'll repeat it?
My question is, you talk about these huge thresholds that technology has made, going from shooting in the studio to doing more detail on your face, being able to maybe more on set. Do you see another threshold coming soon, like maybe the next big step in this technology? Do you see it going in a way that might be more accessible to students or even filmmakers, actors and animators and artists who want to get involved?
Great question. It was like you've been talking about what an incredible threshold this film crossed. What's the next threshold to come, and will that threshold be a little bit more available to, say, student filmmakers and young artists?
Well, the technology is sort of just always on the verge of what you need, right? In other words, we think about a lot of these things. There's a lot of research development that goes into it, a lot of stuff that generally we're just interested in doing, but you don't really push it that final last step until you know what the script is and what the story is. So that's really the thing that'll cause you to lock it down. As far as your second question about being available to students and so forth, yeah, that's always the case. films that we would have made 10 or 15 years ago, or 25 years ago, that technology is more generally available. So look, it takes a big effort to figure it out the first time, but after a few years, people start to get the hang of it, and it does become more generally accessible.
So you think like consumer performance capture is like 3 to 5 year horizon?
Well, you have to think about, when you say performance capture, we talk about the capture aspect of it, but it's really creating the characters that's the part that matters. There's a lot of ways to capture a performance, but you really have to understand what makes a character, and that part just requires a lot of just really artistry. We just spend a lot of time thinking about that and using these tools and adapting them. But at this point, it is by no means an automatic process. It's getting better, it's getting faster, but that's still the part that matters, because you can capture the performance as accurately as possible. If you can't figure out a way to translate it correctly, it falls apart.
Next one.
Question over here.
Just curious, since you have talked about the actors, the director, the motion capture artistry, could you talk about the screenwriters? Was it the same screenwriter, since it is a trilogy, and was it different ones each time?
Yeah, so the first film was authored by and imagined by Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silva, writing partnership, and it was their thing. Rick sat down and had this amazing idea for an origin story, and Rupert Wyatt then came on as the director of Rise and evolved it with them. As the relationship slightly changes once the director gets involved, because you start to want to pull different aspects of the story out and fine tune what it is that you want to say with the movie. So Rupert had a particular take on how he wanted to see Rise come to the fore, and then when Matt came on board with Mark Bombach, he wanted to tell a very different story, and so they had very relatively little time to put Dawn into practice, because Rupert was going to be going on to do Dawn, and then sort of a creative difference evolved, and then he decided he didn't want to do it. So when Matt came on board, he came in with he said, I'd love to do it, but this isn't the story I want to tell. I've got a whole other, I want to see the world through the ape's eyes, and I want to make it much more of an ape-centric story, and make it about an anatomy of violence, really, the second film. And so he pitched the idea, thinking, well, they probably won't say yes, and they said yes. And then he said, okay, and they said, right, well, you've got to get this together really quickly because there's a release date. So he and Mark then worked tirelessly to create that second film, and it was always a sense of, I think he felt he was catching up. It was always a sense of playing catch up because of the release date that was fixed and the film had to be delivered by. And then when it came to the third movie, Matt and Mark had a bit more time to evolve this arc and really understand what it is they wanted to say with this very mythic, epic story which you're about to watch. And so they had more time to really examine how the interweaving of all the characters would play, how Caesar's journey at the centre of it would play, and they worked as a partnership, and I mean what they've done I think is incredible over the last two movies. They really, I mean, Matt has this totally intrinsic understanding of the metaphor that he was dealing with, and it comes from the passion that he always had as a filmmaker, a passion for the films, but also as a true understanding of how he wants to see the world of humans, of us, through the eyes of apes.
So we have time for two more, maybe? Questions are good ones? Yeah. Where are we?
Hi, back here.
Great.
Hi, Joe, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about eyes. In previous digital characters, the eyes have always been kind of dead, and in these films, the eyes are so alive. And how do you manage that, capture that?
Well, look, we've been working on eyes for a long time, because obviously for any character that's important, and that goes back to what we tried to do with Gollum, and I've been very fortunate to have had a chance to work with a lot of characters, over the years, and we just keep learning more and more about them and how to refine them. It comes down to essentially understanding the mechanism of an eye, the structure of an eye, how they move, how they are part of the emotional response, of a performer, how they react to light, what the detail is inside of them. I mean, they're incredibly intricate, layered, organic. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on in there, and the more we crack into it, the more we just start filling out the detail. And all that stuff helps with the realism, but the thing that helps the most is really just that idea of does it carry the performance? You're still just always looking for that aspect of it.
Fantastic. Okay, last one.
Oh, I have a question in the center to your left.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, incredible trilogy. I want to know what your favorite trilogy is and why.
Your favorite other trilogy, or your favorite of the 3 films? Other trilogies, okay.
I think this is the 3rd trilogy we've worked on together. So, yeah. How about a trilogy of trilogies? Does that count? Okay.
I would say though, of all the films you've worked on, is there one that there's a particular special quality to? I would mind hearing what that is.
I mean, I have to say, I think War really is a culmination of extraordinary work and from every single department on this movie, across the board with the acting, across the board with what Matt wanted to do, and the writing, and the way of, I think each film has progressively gotten more intense and more truthful, and the artistry with which the performances are caught and then translated, and just everything. I think this film, War, is for me, and emotionally it feels the most powerful, and it was the darkest by far to shoot, and was the most taxing emotionally as an actor to shoot. So for me, this is the one.
You too, Joe?
It is hard to pick favorites among them all, but the thing is, as Andy's alluding to, you evolve each time, and each time you learn something, and you think that's, in the moment, the best that we can do right now. And I'm really, happy with watching Apes just as a film. Look, I got into this because I like these kinds of films, so it's great to be able to make them and then sit back and watch them, and I have no problems watching this movie over and over again.
Well, thank you for making it, because we all love it. So Joe Letteri, Andy Serkis, thank you so much for being here.